Support for this podcast comes from the law firm of Davis Malm. Whether you're a developer, property owner, manager, or commercial tenant, their real estate attorneys know the lay of the land, not just the law. Learn more at davismalm.com. Support for this podcast comes from Boston University's Questrom School of Business, presenting the Is Business Broken podcast, featuring conversations about the role of business, stakeholder relations, and government at bu.edu/Questrom or wherever podcasts are available.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. When the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission launched its social equity program, it promised a pathway for groups disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs into the newly legalized cannabis market. But today, social equity operators are finding that getting into the cannabis business is a far cry from the lucrative opportunity it once was. Sometimes they're left worse off than they were when they started the process. CommonWealth Beacon reporter Bhaamati Borkhetaria spoke with cannabis operators in the region who graduated from the state's social equity program to learn more about their experiences and the barriers they continue to face getting established in the cannabis industry. Bhaamati, welcome to The Common.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Bhaamati, the cannabis industry seems to be in bad shape, especially for entrepreneurs of color. The price of cannabis has dropped over the years and businesses face challenges since cannabis is still illegal under federal law. And one person you introduced us to is Kijana Rose, who wanted to open a vegan cannabis bakery in the city, but couldn't get it off the ground. So tell us more about her and her experience.
Yeah, so Kijana has had a relationship with cannabis even before it was legalized. She has been teaching ganja yoga for 7 years. She used to sell cannabis even before it was legalized. So when marijuana was legalized in Massachusetts and there was this promise made to social equity candidates, she decided to take advantage of that. And her dream was to open up this vegan cannabis bakery where you could go and get customizable baked goods. Honestly, the concept sounded super cool. She went all in. Unfortunately, she got caught up in this regulatory process that went on for years, during which she accumulated close to $1 million in debt. It was really, really difficult for her to find capital to keep going as she was paying licensing fees and rent and a myriad of other costs. So then here she was in this sort of position of feeling trapped because she was undercapitalized and had a ton of debt. And it felt for her sort of unsustainable.
What else have you heard from folks?
I've heard similar stories. Some common threads that I hear, the really long regulatory process, that's a very common story in the industry. There's also the fact that it's really hard to get capital for your business because cannabis is federally illegal and cannabis businesses can't just get a small business loan. And on top of that, to add to their struggle, the price of cannabis has dropped radically.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, definitely. So marijuana was supposed to be this green rush. It was supposed to be so incredibly profitable. And now that's just simply not true anymore. A lot of people, when they got into the business 2 or 3 years ago, are only now just opening, and the price of cannabis has dropped radically. As one operator put it, at the end of this rainbow, there's no pot of gold. Entrepreneurs expected a much greater rate of return, and now a lot of them are just struggling to break even.
So now that people are finding themselves in a situation where this business that showed so much promise is not that, right? Tell me, how difficult is it to get out of this industry, to just close up shop and call it quits?
Kijana had a really hard time when she was trying to get out of the business when she realized she was in a bad space. So when she went looking to transfer ownership of her license, she was told that the license type she had, which had sold for millions of dollars in the past, was no longer worth that. And she wasn't even sure she'd be able to clear out all of the debt that she'd taken on. That's something that I've heard from several different operators I've talked to, which is that the price of the license has dropped and getting out of the business is much more difficult when your business isn't profitable and there aren't buyers that are going to give you the amount of money you need to safely leave.
Got it. Bhaamati, I want to take a break here, but when we get back, I want to know what can be done to bring some relief to these entrepreneurs. So we'll be right back.
Politics has never been stranger or more online, which is why the politics team at Wired is making a new show, Wired Politics Lab. It's all about how to navigate the endless stream of news and information and what to look out for. Each week on the show, we'll dig into far-right platforms, AI chatbots, influencer campaigns, and so much more. Wired Politics Lab launches Thursday, April 11th. Follow the show wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back with CommonWealth Beacon reporter Bhaamati Borkhetaria. So, Bhaamati, you were explaining to us the difficulties that a lot of cannabis entrepreneurs are facing right now, being that the business has taken a turn for the worse, and it's just not what people had expected it to be. I want to know just how difficult would it be to reform the regulations for the cannabis industry to thrive?
There are many different answers to that question, and it kind of depends on who you're asking. Different operators will tell you different things. They will give you different solutions that will bring about the reform. There are people that will also say that there are small fixes, like quick fixes, for instance, pushing out the grants that have been promised to social equity operators so that they can get the capital that they so desperately need. Once the capital problem is sort of ameliorated, that reform could really give a boost to the industry.
Yeah, and you mentioned the grant program offered by the Executive Office of Economic Development that's supposed to benefit social equity operators. Has that helped at all in this situation?
It's a bit too soon to tell. The grants just went out, so that's something that we're going to find out. When I did talk to some operators who had received the grant, they were optimistic. They hoped that money would keep flowing to them. Some did feel that it wasn't enough, that the amount that was given out this past season wasn't going to be enough. However, the upside is that the Social Equity Trust Fund is going to have up to $27 million later this year that's going to be handed out in grants. And we'll just kind of have to see what kind of impact that makes on the industry.
And you also reported that the Cannabis Control Commission just accepted applications for the fourth cohort of its social equity program just this past April. Do you have a sense of what the outlook is like for the people who are still hoping to get into this industry as it stands right now?
There are definitely some operators that I've spoken to who are currently in the industry who believe that the CCC isn't presenting a realistic picture of what's going on in the industry. As I've reported, social equity operators are particularly struggling for a myriad of different reasons. Dennis Benson, who owns the Western Front dispensary, calls it a pipe dream that's being sold.
Do we have a sense of cannabis operators mobilizing around this issue?
Yeah, so a lot of operators have come together to start prodding the CCC and the legislature to sort of pay attention. From what I've heard from a lot of different operators is that people have very different ideas of what will help. There seems to be a little bit of a lack of consensus amongst different operators, but everyone seems to agree that something needs to shift, something needs to change. And I think that the organization is going to lead to some demands or some sort of consensus on what will help these individual operators.
Bhaamati, are we looking at a situation where the state created this program that is leading to more harm for people of color? Basically, are we looking at another equity issue because of a past equity issue?
That's something that some operators have definitely said. For instance, Dennis Benson has likened his situation to being a sharecropper, being trapped into the industry. So that's definitely a sentiment that's out there.
So with that, what kind of future for the cannabis industry are we looking at if things continue this way?
According to the head of the Massachusetts Cannabis Coalition, Ryan Dominguez, there are some predictions that a lot of places will be closing down in just this coming year because a ton of the businesses aren't profitable. Already, 34 operators have surrendered, not renewed, or had their licenses revoked, according to the CCC, which is twice the number that was reported back in November. So there's a sort of bleak outlook, but there's also some optimism. People are excited about the Social Equity Trust Fund being kicked into gear. So there are people who are looking positively at it and hoping that they get to stay in the industry and that they get to make a profit.
Is anything being done to protect the industry here in the state from, say, bigger entities coming in and basically monopolizing the cannabis industry?
That's a conversation that the state had pretty early on, and they instituted some policies to prevent monopolies. They capped the number of licenses that a single operator can have to 3. And that's a broad conversation that's currently being had by a lot of different people about whether that cap is fair or not. But the intention of having that was to prevent larger companies from buying up a large share of the market and creating a monopoly.
And is that hindering the operators you talk to in any way?
There are definitely some operators who feel that if the cap was removed, if the cap was increased, that they'd have an easier time selling and getting out of the industry.
I guess there's this push and pull happening right now.
Yeah, and it's basically a conversation that the entire industry is having about what would be best for all operators and for social equity operators as well.
Well, Bhaamati, this is an interesting story. Thank you so much for reporting it and coming through to the Common to talk to us about it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
That's CommonWealth Beacon reporter Bhaamati Borkhetaria. And listeners, if you want to learn more about cannabis in Massachusetts, check out the series we did last year called Cannabis en Masse. It came out last May, and we cover things like equity, the market, and also we talked to an entrepreneur about their experience. And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. If you want to get in touch with us, hit us up on Instagram at WBURTheCommon or send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and I will talk to you tomorrow.